There's a version of a man that younger women describe in almost identical terms, no matter where they grew up, no matter who they've dated before. They use words like grounded, they use words like sure of himself, and almost without exception, they say the same thing when asked to explain it further. He doesn't need to be right all the time. That last part tends to stop people for a moment, because it sounds like a paradox. Isn't confidence about being right? Isn't certainty, the kind that draws people in, built on a man who knows what he believes and doesn't waver? Most people think so. And that assumption is missing something that changes everything once you understand it. What most people don't realize is that the men younger women find themselves most drawn to, most curious about, most unable to stop thinking about after the conversation ends tend to share one rare quality. Not youth, not looks, not even humor, though that helps. They share the willingness to say three words that most men spend an entire lifetime avoiding. Stay with me here, because this takes some unpacking before it lands properly. Think about the last time you watched someone double down on something they already knew was wrong. Maybe it was in an argument. Maybe it was watching a public figure refuse to acknowledge an obvious error. Maybe it was someone in your own life who would rather distort the story than admit the story was wrong. Notice how that doubling down felt to everyone around them. Not strong, something closer to brittle, something that made you trust them less, not more. Now think about the last time someone looked you in the eye with no drama, no excessive apology, and simply said, "I was wrong." This is where things become interesting. 2 syllables, 3 words. And yet the effect of those words, when said without performance, without self-flagellation, without immediately pivoting to justify why they were wrong in the first place, is something most people find almost disarming. Not because weakness is attractive, but because what those 3 words actually signal has nothing to do with weakness at all. We'll come back to exactly what they signal. But first, consider the emotional landscape most younger women are navigating when they encounter men who are a decade or two older. Imagine this. She has dated men her own age for years. Men who, for the most part, were still building their identity, still figuring out who they were, still deeply invested in how they appeared to others because they hadn't yet accumulated enough evidence about themselves to feel secure without outside confirmation. In that state, being wrong in front of someone else doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels threatening. It suggests that the self-image being carefully constructed is built on faulty ground. So the instinct, almost automatic, is to defend, to redirect, to make the other person wrong instead, or at least to blur the lines enough that no clear error exists. She has watched this pattern enough times to recognize it before it even fully develops. The subtle pivot when he's corrected, the quiet dismissal when she points something out, the way an admission that might have taken 30 seconds somehow never quite arrives. The deeper truth is this. Defensiveness, even when it looks like confidence, reveals insecurity underneath. And insecurity, over time, is exhausting to live beside because it requires constant management. You learn to soften your observations, to phrase your corrections carefully, to never directly tell him something he doesn't want to hear because you already know the conversation that follows isn't worth the energy. Now we move deeper, because this is where the older man starts to produce a completely different experience. A man who has lived through enough, who has been wrong in consequential ways and survived it, who has made real mistakes and watched them unfold in real time, who has lost something important because he was too proud to admit an error when it might have mattered, eventually stops treating being wrong as a threat. Not because he stops caring about being right, but because he has accumulated enough evidence that admitting an error doesn't destroy him. He's been wrong before, acknowledged it, and remained standing. The ground didn't open up and swallow him. The people worth keeping in his life didn't leave. His self-image held. This is where the 3 words stop being an act of submission and start being something else entirely. Consider the moment a man says, "I was wrong," with no hesitation, no visible discomfort, no immediate rush to qualify or explain. What she's actually witnessing in that moment is not defeat. It's proof that his sense of who he is doesn't depend on being right. His identity is not that fragile. He can hold the fact of his own error without it becoming a crisis. This, without her consciously analyzing it, signals something ancient and fundamental about stability. A man whose self-image collapses the moment he's shown to be incorrect is a man whose mood, behavior, and presence will fluctuate wildly depending on how any given day is going. A man who absorbs a correction and simply adjusts is someone whose internal weather doesn't change with external conditions. And that kind of person, rare as they actually are, creates a completely different feeling to be around. What happens next is important because the effect of this goes deeper than simple admiration. When a man can be wrong without crisis, she doesn't have to manage him. She doesn't have to soften her honesty. She doesn't have to quietly wonder whether pointing something out will lead to a day of coldness or a week of subtle defensiveness. She can be direct because directness doesn't destabilize him. And for a woman who has spent years carefully calibrating how honest she allows herself to be in a relationship, the experience of not needing to do that anymore is something close to relief. But before we go there, there's something deeper still that most people completely overlook. Think about what it communicates about how he values truth. A man who cannot say, "I was wrong," is, in effect, valuing his image over reality. He is prioritizing how things look over what is actually true. And a woman, especially one who is still building her own sense of self and learning which people in her life she can actually trust, notices this at a level she may never put into words. She notices that around some people, reality is always slightly negotiated, always slightly adjusted to protect the story they're telling about themselves. And around others, reality is just reality, even when it's uncomfortable. The man who can say "I was wrong" without flinching is telling her something important about what the relationship with him will actually cost her in energy. It tells her that honesty will be met with honesty rather than with defense. That conversations won't require her to manage his ego before they can actually solve a problem. That being with him day to day won't slowly teach her to make herself smaller in order to keep the peace. There is something deeper happening here, and it's worth slowing down for. The three words themselves are not the thing. The three words are evidence of the thing. And the thing is this: a man who has genuinely stopped needing to be right in order to feel okay about himself is a man who is no longer at war with reality. He's not defending a position. He's not protecting an image. He simply exists, engages honestly, adjusts when he's wrong, and moves forward. And people who spend time around someone like that inevitably describe the same experience. It feels easier to breathe. This is the deepest layer of the entire idea. What younger women describe as obsession, that quality of finding themselves thinking about someone more than they expected to, more than other relationships have produced, almost always traces back not to his confidence in being right, but to his ease with being wrong. Because ease with being wrong signals something that confidence in being right never quite can. That his worth, his steadiness, his presence is not up for renegotiation every time life produces evidence that he's imperfect. And this is where the entire original question turns inside out. The question most people start with is, what do I say to make her more attracted to me? But that question assumes attraction is produced through strategic language, through saying the right things at the right times. The deeper, more honest question is this: have I become someone so secure in who I am that I can be wrong in front of someone I'm attracted to without it shaking the ground I stand on? Because the three words only land with real weight once that security actually exists. Before it does, they sound like an apology. After it does, they sound like strength. And the difference between the two is not in the words themselves. It's in everything that has been built slowly and quietly underneath them. So the better question isn't what to say. It's who you need to have become in order to say it without it costing you something. Once you've become that person, the words take care of themselves, and the people around you will feel the difference before they can explain what the difference actually is. If this opens something for you, there is much more beneath the surface of how emotional security, built not through certainty, but through comfort with imperfection, shapes the kind of attraction that curiosity, charm, and wit alone cannot produce. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.